Chapter 12. Trouble with Authority. What was left of the morning passed uneventfully. Omri had gotten a few sums done, and by the time the first whiffs of the school lunch were beginning to flood through the classroom, Omri was congratulating himself on a stroke of genius in putting the two little men together. There had not been another peep out of either one of them. When Omri took the opportunity, when his teacher's back was turned, he opened his pocket stealthily and peered into it. He was pleased to see them sitting at the bottom face to face, apparently having a conversation, for both of them were gesticulating with their arms. There was too much noise all around for Omri to be able to hear their tiny little voices. He had given some thought to the matter of their lunch. He would separate them for that, one in each pocket, and slip some bits of food down there to them. Omri let himself play with a wonderful fantasy of what would actually happen if he casually brought them out and let them sit on the edge of this plate. Funny to think how certainly he would have done it only a few weeks ago, without thinking of any of the dangers. The bell rang at last, and there was a usual stampede, and Omri found himself in line next to Patrick. "Come on, then, hand him over," Patrick whispered over the tray as they shuffled towards the fragrant food slots. "Not now, everyone see." "You said at lunchtime." "After lunch." "I want them now. I want to feed them." "Well, you can have Boom, but I want to feed Little Bear." "You said I could have them both," said Patrick in a loud voice. Others were beginning to turn their heads. "Will you shut up?" hissed Omri. "No," said Patrick, loud and clear voice, and he held out his hand. Omri, trapped but furious, he took Patrick's wrist, or looked into Patrick's eyes, saw that there happens to be the nicest people when they want something badly and they are determined to get it. Come what may, Omri slammed his empty tray down on the floor, taking Patrick by the wrist, pulled him out of the line and onto the quiet part of the hall. "Listen to me," Omri grated out between clenched teeth in anger. "If you let anything happen to Little Bear, I will bash you so hard your teeth will fall out." This, of course, is what happens to even nicer people when they are in a trap. With that, he groped in his pocket, brought the two little men out. He didn't look at them or say goodbye to them. He just put them carefully into Patrick's hands and walked away. Omri had lost his appetite. He didn't get back in line, but Patrick did, and he even pushed a little bit. He was so eager to get some food to give the cowboy and Indian, and Omri watched in the distance. He wished now he wouldn't have been too angry to give Patrick some pretty clear instructions, like telling him to separate them. Now, as he thought about it, perhaps it was a good idea to feed them in his pocket. Who wants to eat something that's descended between two layers of cloth and collected bits of dust and fluff? If he still had them, he would have taken them somewhere private place and then let them take them out so they could eat properly. Why had he even brought them to school at all? The dangers were just too awful. Watching and suddenly stiffened, Patrick reached to the food slot now and received his dinner. He almost ran to the other table and did try to go somewhere on the other side near the windows, but the lunch lady stopped him and made him sit in the middle of the hall. There were children all around him on either side. Surely, thought Omri, surely he wasn't going to try to feed them there. But he saw Patrick take a pinch of bread, slip it into his pocket. He was not wearing a jacket. The men were in his jeans. Fortunately, the jeans were new and they were loose. But still, he had to half stand up to get the bread in there. When he was sitting down, the people in his pocket must have pretty well squished against his leg. Omri imagined them trying to eat, held down flat by two thick layers of cloth. He could almost see Patrick imagining it too. He was frowning, uneasily shifting around in his chair. The girl next to him spoke to him. He was probably telling him not to wiggle, but Patrick said something sharply in reply, and Omri sucked in his breath. If only Patrick wouldn't draw such attention to himself all the time. Suddenly he gasped. The little girl gave Patrick a hard push. He pushed her right back, and she nearly went off the chair. She stood up and pushed him with all her might. Using both hands, he went flying over backward, half onto a boy on the other side of him, who jumped out of his place, spilling part of his dinner. Patrick landed on the floor. Omri didn't even want to stop to think. He raced towards him across the hall, dodging in and out among the tables. His heart was hammering with terror. If Patrick had fallen on them, oh my goodness, Omri had a terrible, fleeting vision of his pocket, of Patrick's jean with bloodstains spreading. He clamped down on his own imagination. By the time he got there, Patrick was back on his feet. But now the other boy was angry and clearly looking for a fight. The girl on the other side looked ready to clobber him too. Omri pushed between them, but the stout lunch lady was right ahead of him. "Yeah, what's going on?" she asked, barging in with her big stomach and sturdy arms. She grabbed Patrick with one hand and the other boy with the other, and kind of dangled them out at arm's length like cats. "No fighting in here. Thank you very much. Or off to the headmasters for both of you. As fast as you can say knife, you old bloomin' pack of you." She dumped them down in separate chairs like bags of shopping. They were both thoroughly tousled and red-faced. Omri's eye shot down at Patrick's thigh. Whew, no blood. No movement either, though, but at least no blood. Everyone began to eat again, and the stout lunch lady stomped away, tut-tutting as she went by. Omri leaned over to Patrick's chair and whispered on a dry mouth, "Are they all right?" And Patrick said, "How do you know?" said Patrick sadly. But he put his hand down deliberately, explored the slight bump on his leg, and he said, "Yeah, they're moving," Patrick muttered. Omri went out to the playground. He was too jumpy to stay indoors, to eat anything or anything. How did he get them back from Patrick, who quite obviously was no person to be in charge of them? Nice as he was as a friend, he just wasn't fit. It must be because he didn't take them seriously yet. He simply didn't see and to realize that they were actually really real people. The bell rang, and Omri still hadn't come to any decision. He turned back to the school. Patrick was nowhere to be seen. Omri looked around him frantically. Maybe he'd gone to the toilet or somewhere private to give the men something to eat. Omri went there and called to him softly, but there was no answer. He turned to his place in the classroom. There was no sign of Patrick, and there continued to be no sign of him until about halfway through the lesson. Not a one word of which Omri took in. He was so worried. At last, when the teacher turned her back to write on the board, Patrick slipped in around the partition, rushed across the room silently, and dropped in his chair. "Where have you been?" Omri asked under his breath. "In the music room," Patrick said smugly. The music room was not a room really at all. It was just a little alcove of the gym in which some musical instruments were stored, together there with some bulkier apparatuses like the long horse. "I sat under the horse and fed them," he muttered out of the side of his mouth. "Only they weren't very hungry." "I bet they weren't," said Omri, "after all they've been through." "Cowboys and Indians are used to rough treatment," Patrick retorted. "Anyway, I left some food in my pocket for later on if they want it." "It'll get all squishy." "Oh, so what? Don't fuss so much. They don't mind." "How do you know they don't mind?" Omri said haughtily, forgetting to whisper. The teacher turned around. "Oh, so there you are, Patrick. And where have you been, may I inquire?" "Sorry, Miss Hilton." "I didn't ask if you were sorry. I asked where you'd been." Patrick coughed and lowered his head. "In the toilet," he mumbled. "For nearly 20 minutes? I don't believe you. Are you telling me the truth?" Patrick mumbled something. "Patrick, answer me, or I'll have to send you to the headmistress." There was an ultimate threat. The headmister was very fierce and could make you feel about 2 inches high. So Patrick said, "Well, I was in the music room, and that's true, and I forgot what time it was." "And that's not true," said Omri silently in his head, and Miss Hilton was obviously not buying it either. "You'd be better off to go see Mr. Johnson," she said. "Omri, you go too, chattering away as usual. Tell him I said you both were disturbing the class, and I'm really extremely quite tired of it." They got up silently and walked through the tables with all the boys and girls giggling, and boys smirked, and some felt like they felt bad for him, whether they liked them or not. Omri glanced at Patrick under his eyebrows. They were in for it now. Outside the headmaster's office, they stopped. "You knock," whispered Omri. "No, you," retorted Patrick. They dithered about for a few minutes, but then it was no use to put it off, so they both knocked together. "Yes," came a rather irritable voice from inside. They edged to the door. Mr. Johnson was seated at the large desk, working on some papers. He looked up. "Ha! Well, you two. What is it this time? Fighting or playing on the playground or talking in class?" "Talking," they said. Patrick added, and I was late. "Why?" "It was just—" "Oh, don't waste my time," snapped Mr. Johnson. "There must be a reason for your tardiness." "I was in the music room and I forgot what time it was," Patrick repeated. "I don't remember you being especially musical. And why were you there? What were you doing in the music room?" "Playing." "With what instrument?" asked Mr. Johnson, with a touch of sarcasm. "I was just playing." "With what?" he asked, raising his voice. "With he glanced at Omri and threw him a wearing glance. What are you two pulling faces about, Omri? You look as though somebody has stuck a knife into you." And that started it. Omri started to giggle, and that set Patrick off. "Someone just did," sputtered Patrick. Mr. Johnson was in no such jolly mood. However, he was scowling horribly. "What are you two talking about, you silly boys? Stop that idiot nonsense noise." Patrick's giggles now were getting worse. If he hadn't been there with Omri, thought Patrick would have folded up completely. Somehow, someone did stick a knife in him, hiccuped Patrick. "A very small one." His voice went off in a sort of whinny. Omri stopped giggling and was staring as if awful anticipation in Patrick, which Patrick got into the state where he was apt to do or say anything, if like someone who had drank too much beer. Omri took a hold of his arm and gave him a sharp shake. "Shut up," he hissed. Mr. Johnson got slowly and came around to the desk. Both boys fell back a step, but Patrick didn't stop giggling. On the contrary, it got worse. He seemed to be getting completely helpless. Mr. Johnson loomed over him and took him by the shoulder. "Listen here, lad," he said in a fearsome tones. "I want you to pull yourself together this moment and tell me what you meant. If there is any child in this school that is far forget himself to stick knives into people or even pretend to, I want to know about it. Now, who is he?" "Little bear," squeaked Patrick out, tears running down his cheeks. Omri gasped. "Don't!" "Who?" asked Mr. Johnson, puzzled. Patrick didn't answer. He couldn't. He was now speechless, with nervous, almost hysterical laughter. Mr. Johnson gave him a shake of his own that rocked him back and forth to his feet like one of those weighted dolls that won't fall down. Then sharply he let him go and said, "You seem to be quite beyond yourself," he said sharply. "I think the only thing I can do is telephone your father." Patrick stopped immediately. "Ah, that's better," said Mr. Johnson. "Now, who did you say stopped Omri?" Patrick stood rigid like a soldier, at attention. He didn't even look at Omri. He just pretended or stared straight at Mr. Johnson. "I want the truth, Patrick, and I want it now." "Little bear," said Patrick very clearly, and much louder than necessary. "Little who?" "Bear," said Mr. Johnson. Looked blankly at him, as well might. "Is this somebody's nickname or your idea of a joke?" Patrick gave his head a little stiff shake. Omri was staring at him as if paralyzed. Was he going to tell? He knew Patrick was afraid of his father. "Patrick, I shall ask you one more time. Who is this little bear?" Patrick opened his mouth, and Omri clenched his teeth and was helpless. Patrick said, "He's an Indian." "A what?" asked Mr. Johnson, his voice very stern. Now he didn't sound annoyed anymore, though. "An Indian?" Mr. Johnson looked at him steadily for 2 more seconds, his chin resting on his hand. "You are too old to tell these sort of lies," he said quietly. "It's not a lie!" Patrick shouted suddenly, making both Omri and Mr. Johnson jump. "It's not a lie! He's real! He's a real American Indian!" And to Omri's utter horror, he saw Patrick beginning to cry. Mr. Johnson saw it too. He was not an unkind man. No headmaster's much good if they can not scare the wits out of children when necessary, but Mr. Johnson didn't enjoy making people cry. Now then, Patrick, none of that, he said gruffly. But Patrick misunderstood, and he thought he was still saying he didn't believe him. All now, the words Omri had been dreading came out. It's true, I can prove it! And his hand went right to his pocket. Omri did the only thing possible he could do. He jumped on him, knocked him over, and sat on his chest and pinned his hands to the ground. Don't you dare! You dare! You dare! He ground out between clenched teeth before Mr. Johnson managed to drag him off. Get out of the room now, he roared. I won't, Omri choked out. He'd been crying himself in a minute. He felt so desperate. Out! Omri felt his collar seized, and then almost hiked off his feet. The next thing he knew, he was outside the door, hearing them key turn. Without stopping to think, Omri hurled himself at the door, knocking and banging his fist. Don't show him, Patrick! Don't show him! Patrick, I'll kill you if you show him! He screamed at the top of his lungs. Footsteps came running. Through the tears and the sort of red haze, Omri saw Mrs. Hunt, the headmaster's elderly secretary, bearing down on him. He got a couple more good kicks in and shouts before she got a hold of him. And with both arms around his waist, she carried him shrieking and struggling bodily into her own little office. The minute she put him down, he tried to bolt, but she hung on. Omri, stop it! Calm down! Whatever's gotten over you, you naughty little boy. Please don't let him go. Stop him, Omri said. Who and what? Before Omri could explain, he heard the sound of footsteps in the next room. Suddenly, Mr. Johnson appeared holding Patrick by the elbow. The headmaster's face was dead white, and his mouth was partly open. Patrick's head was hung low down, and his shoulders were heaving with sobs. One look told him everything. Omri knew that Patrick had shown him